At a glucose value, a lipid value, be it body weight or waist circumference or whatever, at some point you're forced to deal with the behaviors because that's what you're trying to change. You all appreciate that obesity is not a behavior, it's an outcome. And yet it is striking sometimes, as I've had the opportunity to say from the podium, how very atypical it is to have a good behavioral scientist working with the team to try and help us affect behavior change. Because the second thing we appreciate is it's one thing to get a behavior change over 6 months and to change weight or waist circumference or blood pressure over 6 months. It's quite another challenge to sustain that reduction. And all of you in here, if you're in the business, you've fought with that challenge. Well, our next speaker is truly one of the very, very best in the world at running the kinds of good randomized controlled trials that try to get the information that can help us understand the best determinants that we have today at changing and, more importantly, sustaining those behavior changes. So please with me welcome today John Jakicic, who will speak to that very notion.
Thanks, Bob. Thanks all for coming. I have a new puppy at home, so I'm very versed in this, my life surrounding bathroom breaks, Bob. So I'll try to move through this quickly and efficiently. And I've been charged with talking about physical activity for weight loss and prevention of weight gain and regain, which is, basically a day's full of discussion if you really want to get into it. But I'll share with you some results that we have from some ongoing and some recently completed trials, and hopefully will support at least my position of how important physical activity is for controlling body weight. And I want to start just by reminding you all that probably the best way to change body weight maximally, and I'll show you some data, is to address this energy intake and energy expenditure side of the energy balance equation. And I think that to effectively really move body weight, if that's your outcome, that you need to be considering both of these. And the one thing that is really interesting is that if you start to talk to your participants, they are extremely confused as to how much activity they need to do and what the effective activity is on body weight. And that's the realistic assumption when we start to survey them. And I believe part of that is because some of us have been confused, and the guidelines for which we are trying to follow have evolved over the course of time. Really, over the last 10 or 15 years, they've really changed a lot. And if you go back and you look at some of these recommendations, you'll understand that. So I know Dr. Haskell is going to talk about the current guidelines, so I'm not going to really talk about those, but just to real quickly give you a sense of how things have been evolving, you go back to 1995 and actually even a little bit before that, and you have these guidelines from the CDC in the United States and the American College of Sports Medicine talking about this 30 minutes on most, preferably all days of the week. And this has really been the backbone of where we've been trying to get at least everybody to at a minimal level. But then you start to move forward about 5 or 6 years, and you see that the guidelines for body weight start to change. And understand that if you go back and look at those 95 guidelines, those guidelines never were intended to change body weight. It didn't talk about body weight. It talked about the cardiovascular disease mostly and chronic diseases, but not body weight. And a lot of people tried to make that jump from that level to what's going to happen with body weight. And we may have been a little bit premature because in 2001, the American College of Sports Medicine concluded that maybe a little bit more activity, actually a lot more activity, might be important based on the data we had at that time. And soon after that, and I know a lot of people don't like the Institute of Medicine guidelines, but in essence, they were supporting a higher dose of exercise. And in 2003, the IASO, I believe, Steve, you were on that panel that helped to write that one, also supported a higher level of exercise above that 150 minutes for addressing the body weight issues. Then you move forward to the 2005 guidelines, and it started to clarify for us a little bit in terms of what you get for what you do. And I think this has really been very helpful to us to understand that for a certain amount of activity, you're really looking at risk reduction issues like 30 minutes a day. But for more to control body weight, maybe prevent weight gain, prevent weight regain, the guidelines were suggesting a lot more activity at that time. And a lot of people were starting to really get nervous about this guideline here of this 60 to 90 minutes a day, saying, boy, we can barely get people to do this. How in the world are we going to get them to do this? And that's an argument potentially for a whole nother day. But the one thing that also came out of these guidelines, and consistently if you look in there, it does say this, and I'm sure Dr. Haskell will address this, is these are minimum guidelines. You know, the more you do to a certain level, as Dr. Church showed, the better off you're going to be on some parameters. We can't overlook that. And in 2007, even our American Heart Association guidelines came out and talked about maybe more activity is important for issues around unhealthy weight gain. And then in 2009, and I'm skipping over the 2008 physical activity guidelines for Americans, I know that'll be addressed probably. In 2009, the American College of Sports Medicine did a scientific review of the literature over the last 10 years or so, and a few of us were on that writing committee, and we concluded that we really wanted people to do 150 minutes of activity a week, and that was important for some outcomes, and that there might be likely a dose-response relationship. And we started to, again, talk about this potentially higher level of activity when it came to improving long-term outcomes of weight. So I want to show you some of the literature that might help to support or clarify or maybe even confuse these a little bit more, but just to kind of give you a sense of where we are at this point in time. And I'll start by saying physical activity is important for body weight control. And I think you all would agree with that. If you're in the audience, you probably absolutely agree with that. The question is how much weight change will you get for the activity that you do? And the one way to look at this is when you have to take a look at activity alone. If we do an intervention, and I will start this by saying that our intervention studies are not the ones that you bring people into the lab and you make sure that they do exactly what you've asked them to do. Ours are more free-living adults where we make recommendations to a strong behavioral program and have the realistic world influence what's going on to say, when you prescribe this and people start to adopt and adhere and so on as they likely do, this is what you may get with a strong behavioral program behind it. And so these are what you find when you just do exercise alone. If you start to prescribe exercise alone, and I always like to jump back to the one study that we did in